Transcript for the novel DRACONUM. Dragonfire had burned a trench through the center of Evergreen and was now spreading. Townsfolk were moving in a form of organized chaos, with the leaders taking charge and ascribing duties with haste. The surviving women and children were being led to the shelters dug in the foothills, and the men were either taking up arms, futile though it might seem, and establishing defensive positions, or attempting to rescue people from the homes in the path of the swelling blaze. The buildings and those inside that took the brunt of the attack never had a chance. Dragonfire burns with an intensity far greater than what most humans can comprehend. Inhabitants of the building hit directly by the great red flames were nearly vaporized, suffering a brief flash of extraordinary heat, and then nothing. One could even make the argument that it was almost a merciful death, because those who had survived the initial attack now had to contend with its aftermath. The dragon was performing another bank, and would soon be upon them once again, and shouts dire nature rang out, "It's coming! Get to the shelters! Arm yourselves!" This is where Nigel found himself, amidst the swirling flames and chaos, smoke and burning buildings. No one seemed to notice him astride Shadow, but then, had a citizen of Evergreen viewed the familiar face in this posture, astride Shadow, prepping to fight a dragon, they most likely would have thought their eyes were betraying them. He wanted to warn those around him, to tell them to drop their weapons and flee to the shelters before the dragon returned, but he had not the time. What little time he had required his concentration, for the dragon had completed its turn and was now headed back for another pass, and the fire was spreading. When a red dragon is nigh upon you, prioritization is simplified. Nigel turned Shadow so that he faced his foe directly, raised his staff and pointed it at the approaching menace. Mustering his courage, he recited a passage from an ancient text in an ancient language, summoning everything he had. As the dragon drew closer, the intensity of his words increased until he was shouting without even realizing it, and his staff was aglow with a fire of its own. Infernus. He was deep in the throes of a sort of bloodlust red dragon's experience amidst chaos, for it is chaos, especially that by their own means, where reds thrive, and he was now in his element. The first attack, he thought, as he banked for another turn, was most likely sufficient. However, a second would surely render the town in a state beyond recovery. And where is the surrogate guardian? He thought as he leveled off and began to head back. Perhaps he was not prepared to behold such a sight as me. Perhaps he is cowering with the women and the children in their pitiful shelters. And he laughed out loud at the thought of his would-be foe cowering before him, and the laugh quickly developed into another roar. "Your understudy has failed you, Silver!" Wherever or whoever this guardian might be, it would do to stay hidden. And he roared again, only this time his roar evolved into words. "Hide, guardian, hide amongst the sheep!" He was nigh upon the village, and folded his wings in preparation to deliver the final blow when something in his path, directly in his path, caught his attention. At first, it appeared it might be an ember amongst the flames, and as he drew closer, its glow intensified until it seemed to burn its image in his mind. In an instant, as one suddenly sees trees within a forest, he could visualize the source of the glowing light. A staff, hoisted by a man astride a horse. The great red sneered. "The guardian reveals himself." His eyes were aflame, his nostrils flared. "Rum brum infernus, loathed wizards." "Nigel," Shadow whinnied. "Steady, old friend," he said in a calm voice. "Steady, you are not alone in your fear." He had gotten the dragon's attention, which was the plan, and now he and Shadow stood their ground as the beast drew upon them at tremendous speed, his staff radiating heat from the power within, emboldening him. The dragon presented a horrible sight, nearly occupying the entire field of vision. Under duress, the human mind operates with amazing clarity, allowing the individual to block out interferences and focus. Nigel beheld the dragon with pristine detail, scales, teeth, horns, talons, all within an instant. With a sweep of its wings and a great rush of wind, the dragon drew up and presented itself before landing with tremendous impact and roared with laughter. "The guardian presents itself." He lowered his head. You should have stayed hidden among the sheep, wizard. Nigel did not respond, but rather kept his focus while standing his ground astride Shadow. And the great red reared up, and his voice rose as he spread his wings and bellowed, "Behold! Behold, wizard, the harbinger of your doom, and know my name. I am Rum Rum Infernus." Now Nigel did respond, shouting above the din. "Your name betrays your arrogance, dragon, and that arrogance will in time betray you." The dragon, now insulted, roared with rage, and Nigel hoisted his staff. The light from which was now blinding directed it towards the beast as it opened its maw, and with tremendous explosion, all the power Nigel could muster erupted from his staff and met head-on with the dragon fire. Geoffrey. From above he witnessed the attack. He shadowed the great red as it flew over the town of Evergreen, wondering what he could do to help. But what could he do? Compared to the red, he was but a fly. And then he saw Nigel make his stand against the monster, displaying incomprehensible courage in the face of such terrifying foe. Now they appeared locked in a stalemate of force. But for how long? Could Nigel hold off the beast indefinitely? He continued to circle, trying to summon his courage. Nigel needed his help. Do something! But the fear was holding him back. His feeling of impotence in the face of battle was augmented by the resultant guilt over watching his friend go it alone. Sweetling. He would later think that it must have been imagined, but at the time it seemed so real, as though she was with him. Sweetling. It struck him, as would a blast of cold water. His mother's voice, calm, confident, poised. He hadn't heard it since that day, the day that she had given him an order to go, to flee to Evergreen. "Mama, your friend is in need." He knew this. He understood Nigel's chances of surviving this battle, but the red dragon seemed an immovable force, and he was stricken with fear. "I'm afraid." "Yes, sweetling," said the voice, "but not alone." He was swept with emotion. Suddenly, Geoffrey understood the bravery his mother must have displayed that day, in facing a seemingly insurmountable foe so that he might survive. He realized how she too must have been stricken with fear and emotion in that moment. He marveled at the courage it must have taken to overcome that fear, the same courage his friend Nigel was currently summoning in order to save a village. You are not alone. In that moment, Geoffrey realized that fear would not pass, and that in fear, only in fear, one discovers courage. Now emboldened by her memory, the young dragon folded his wings and dove. The pitch. The awestruck teenagers observed the maelstrom of the stands of the jousting pitch. Not a word was spoken amongst them. Humans have a tendency for grandiosity in hindsight. Assertions of bravado regarding outcome of conflict, "Had I only been there," could have been heard in homes, town halls, pubs, and taverns throughout the foothills and beyond. However, what Chad and his friends were witnessing would serve to remind them in years to come what it meant to be truly afraid, to be literally petrified with fear, and that sans action bravado is merely a fart out the wrong end. The enormous dragon seemed to be in the midst of a battle, and its silhouette was backlit by a blinding explosion of light. They could not see the source of the dragon's ire, but whatever it was giving the beast what for. Chad felt compelled to do something. Something. His father always said that something was better than nothing. But he felt as though his feet were rooted into the wooden plank upon which he stood. He could hear the shouts above the din. People were taking action, helping others into the shelters. Bloody hell, he thought. Someone is actually fighting the dragon. And yet he and his friends stood by mesmerized, transfixed by what they saw. Suddenly, he found his voice. We've got to do something." Matthew responded, "Like what?" He was unsure. He stole his eyes for a moment and looked around. The horses were gone. They had somehow gotten free of the post to which they were fixed. "We've got out." "Right," Strong John muttered. "Come on." The friends started making their way out of the stands, all except for Kit, whose gaze was directed above the spectacle directly in front of them, towards the sky. Chad noticed this. "Kit, come on." "Wait." He retreated to her position. "What is it?" It took a moment, but she pointed toward the sky. "There." Chad followed her pointed finger skyward and caught a glimpse of reflected light. It would appear, then disappear, then reappear again. See that? Aye, Chad said. I see it. It was too small and too far to decipher, but without question, something seemed to be observing the fight from above. Then suddenly, without warning, the light became a small, intense flash and dropped from its position in the sky, evolving into what appeared as a comet streaking towards the scene below. The flash was blinding. The clap of thunder boomed, and suddenly the dragon reared up and let out a roar full of rage as though it were caught by surprise and suddenly stricken with pain. The silhouette of the beast seemed to increase in size until it blocked out the explosion of light entirely, and Chad, having a moment of clarity, grabbed Kit, turned to his friends and shouted, "Run!"